Hey everyone, welcome. Looks like people are already signing in. So welcome to the webinar. This should be interesting. There have been, let's just say, a surprising number of people who have signed up for this thing. So wow, look at all these people signing in. That's awesome. Thanks for saying hello. That's pretty cool. Yeah, we're gonna have some fun. Hey, just welcome, and I want to say on behalf of Motorsport-Safety Foundation that's hosting this thing, and Bill Wade and David Ray and I are excited to kind of share some of our experiences with you about the whole lead follow thing. And I know that our world has changed, and we need to change to keep up with that. So I think that's why everybody's on this call. So we'll have some fun with that. Our goal is not to sell you on the idea of using lead follow. You know, our goal here is to present you with some information, share some past experiences that we've had, and I think we'll be able to share some what would be called the best practices. We've each had some good experiences here doing lead follow, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But that's our goal for tonight, is just to share a lot of information. I don't claim that we're going to answer every single question and give you every piece of information you're ever going to need about this, but we'll get you started down that path anyways. One thing, kind of a housekeeping thing, the chat box off to the side here, I see lots of you signed in and saying hello, and even Paul from Australia. Great to see you, and everybody else on there. So awesome. And the one thing, and some of you have been on webinars that I've done in the past, and you answer or you ask questions as we go along through the thing, and my wife Robin usually keeps track of those things. I'm flying solo today along with David and Bill, but if you have a question and you think there's a chance that we might answer it as we go along, save that question. Just make note of it, save it. We'll get to the end and we'll say, anybody got any questions? At that point in time, we'll ask you to post your question, because if you posted it right now, you can see the way that chat bar is going down there. We'll probably lose your question if you just put it up there now. If it's a question that you're like, I need to know the answer to this right now because you guys have been talking about something that I don't understand and I need some clarification on that before we go on, go ahead and put that in there. We'll try to keep an eye on it. Hopefully we'll be able to answer that. Hey, I just want to introduce, and for those of you who don't know, David Ray. David, most of you know David as the founder and owner of Hooked on Driving, HOD. And what maybe you don't know is that David, for years, did a lot of lead follow instruction in SCCA racing schools and has been in the driver training community. I think, David, you're 32 years old now?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like 32 years. And yeah, I mean, he's been doing this for at least 5 or 6 years. No, for more than that. He's got a lot of experience in the whole driver training area. But what's really interesting, I think, about David is he's implementing the use of lead follow instruction into his organization, HOD, right now. So he's in the same position. While he has a lot of experience using it, he's also in the same position as an event organizer of implementing it into the organization. So he's in the same shoes as a lot of you. So David, welcome. Thanks for sharing tonight.
Well, thank you for asking me to participate. I'm honored to be a part of the MSF program as a whole and on the advisory council with the other gang, the rest of the gang. I did want to just share that from our perspective, we clearly are based around in-car coaching. That's evolved into what HOD is about, like most of the primary programs out there. But the COVID-19 crisis made us all scratch our head and figure out what to do. I mean, we might not be able to do an event with a coach in a car. And so I drug into my organization like 25 years of doing lead and follow with the SCCA licensing program. And also, because of that, we kind of started HOD back in 2004 using a lot of lead and follow as we were building our team. So we put a lot of concepts, a lot of experience together here. But at the end of the day, we may all evolve back to in-car coaching, but also we'll end up having another tool in our toolbox.
Cool. And Bill Wade, a lot of people know you, Bill, through your involvement with BMW CCA, but also the Tire Rack Street Survival Program, which is an awesome program. But I think what a lot of people don't know is your more recent experience doing a lot of lead follow instruction, particularly at NCM with the Corvette program and some other clubs and organizations that you've been involved in. So it's great to get your perspective as someone coming from a lot of in-car, and recently doing a lot more lead follow. But also it's interesting because BMW CCA is starting to look at how to implement this as well. So thanks for joining us here.
And I appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to having a good discussion here and hopefully shining the light on this to, as David said, give more tools for your toolbox. I do have to be careful, though. I've seen Mitch Wright log in here, so I've got to be careful. The boss is watching. We've been, I started doing this back in the 1900s, so it's interesting to kick it into the next chapter here.
Speaking of the 1900s, I was thinking today, the first time that I did lead follow, I think the first time was in 1986. And some of you might be going, did they have cars back then? Yes, they did. And in 1987, I started a school, and for about 5 or 6 years, I would spend 100 days, over 100 days every single year doing lead follow. So I've got a few miles driving around a track with people following me, kind of going, what are they doing back there? Why do they keep following me everywhere I go? And then just recently, actually last year, I got a chance to do some lead follow again a couple of times. So it's still the same. It's still the same. So anyways, that's our background. But mostly, again, we're representing Motorsport-Safety Foundation. David and Bill are both on the advisory council, along with John Krechek, John Ewald, Ryan Staub, Brian Giddinelli, and then Eric Meyer and Scott Elkins and I are on the board. Did I miss anybody, guys? Sorry.
Jim Pomeroy.
Pardon me? Sorry?
Pomeroy.
Oh, Jim Pomeroy. I'm sorry, from Chin. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, Jim. So we're going to be sharing this. I think we need to think about this whole thing of lead follow is a question, I guess, is this a temporary thing or is this a permanent thing? And I guess I'm just going to toss out a little bit of a thing to get you thinking is I actually think it's a tool that, as Bill and David have both mentioned, it's a tool in our toolbox that we should be thinking about using, not just on a temporary basis, but it can be used going forward. I've been a proponent in the past few years of, we've kind of had this model of, I call it the on-off switch model. We have an instructor in the car, we have an instructor in the car, we have an instructor in the car, you're solo, go ahead. And it's kind of a on-off instruction kind of a deal. And I think lead follow is just another tool that can help with more of a transition and help a lot of drivers. So just going to plant that seed, and hopefully it'll get you thinking that you may find that this is not a temporary thing. It is right now. With that, real quickly, we're going to just plow through a few of the pros and cons that the three of us have talked about over the past week. And some of the pros, some of the advantages of lead follow is the very first one is you can control the speed of your student. If you've ever been in the right seat with a student or in the left seat for you from down under or the UK, if you've been in the passenger seat and you're having a trouble slowing your student down, the good thing is when you're leading them, unless they're going to run into your rear bumper, you have some control. You can actually control their speed better than you can when you're in the car with them. So that's an advantage. You can demonstrate the line very, very clearly, as opposed to verbally trying to get them to take the line that you want. Here's an important thing, and it's something the three of us have talked a lot about, and it's something that I really strongly believe in, is everybody learns in different ways. And there are some students you're going to find that will learn more and more quickly with lead follow than they ever would with you in the right seat or in the left seat, in the passenger seat. And, there's this whole concept of learning from the inside out. Like if I ask you a question and you figure out what to do with it, you've learned from the inside out. And that's probably going to stick with you longer than if I just give you the answer. And sometimes when we're in the car with a driver, we're just giving them the answer. We're saying, turn now, brake now, get on the throttle now, whatever. And they're just kind of following our commands. So there are some advantages there for the lead follow approach. Another advantage is you can actually, in an in-car instruction role, it's a one-on-one thing. In this situation, you can expand it to 1-on-2, maybe 1-on-3. We don't really think that going beyond 1-on-3 is a good advantage or a good plan. I think Bill and I were both talking the other day that we both had it, and I'm sure David has. I've had experience with lead follow with 7 cars behind me, and it gets pretty messy, and it's not an ideal situation. But the key here is that one instructor can actually work with 2 students or 3 students in a much more efficient way than they can in an in-car situation. So that's another advantage. I think because, and we'll touch on this about how students and how the system works with rotation, you actually stage them moving offline, being passed, and then them passing. So there's kind of very slowly, but from the very beginning, they get used to the idea of actually passing. So there's that advantage. It is great practice for the instructor. It's a challenge. We'll admit that it's a challenge. It's a mental challenge of driving the perfect line, watching the mirror, keeping an eye on 1, 2, 3 cars behind you. But if you look at it as a great learning opportunity, you will become a better instructor and a better driver from the experience of doing that. Another advantage is it's all we've got right now. So accept it. And then I think, arguably it's safer. I know some people say it's not as safe. There are pros and cons to that. Okay, I'm rushing through these things. I want to get into some other stuff, and I want to give David and Bill some time here. But some of the disadvantages, some of the cons that we've discussed. You're not in the car, so you cannot see how the driver is using the controls. You can't see how they're applying or releasing the brake pedal. You can't see how they're turning the steering wheel. You can't even see, hard to see, whether they actually have 2 hands on the steering wheel or 1 hand resting on the shifter. We can't see if they're turning their head. So you can a little bit, but not a lot of that. So there's the disadvantage of not being able to be in the car and see the driver using the controls. I'd say that's the single biggest disadvantage. With experience, my experience tells me it's amazing what you can figure out from watching the attitude of a car, even watching it in your mirrors and seeing the attitude of the car, and you can go, oh, that driver's not very smooth with the brakes, or that driver isn't turning the steering wheel very smoothly, or whatever. So you can gain some of that back. As I touched on, it is a huge challenge as an instructor to drive, look in the mirror, kind of make mental notes of, on the 4th lap, the green car did this. It's a tough thing to do, but it's doable. It's very dependent on that instructor in that car. I would say it requires even more clear communication before a session and after a session. A lot of times we can kind of give a quick, come on, let's, we're going to work on this. Okay, let's go. We have to be very, very clear with our description and what we want the student to do before we ever get in the track. So, and by the way, most of what we're going to talk about tonight is with the assumption, most of the assumption is you're doing it without a technical or a technology based communication system, radios, cell phones, which I would just say is a bonus if you're able to do that. But we're kind of going mostly under the assumption that you don't have that. If you've got that, like I said, it's just bonus. A disadvantage sometimes is if you've got a student who just can't keep up. They're so overwhelmed by this new experience of being on a track, they just cannot keep up, even though you're going pretty darn slow. That's a challenge. And then there are times when maybe you're driving a car and you've got a student who's got a much faster car, and it's almost like you can't keep up to the student. That can happen as well. And then the last one again is it safer? I don't know. I'm going to say it's about the same. David, Bill, you guys got some comments? Anything you want to throw into that?
Yeah, I'll throw in one thing from the instructing side. I think it's going to be probably a more fun experience for the coach. We call them coaches, instructors.
Yep.
they're getting some seat time, and you mentioned that it's good practice for them. That, boy, consistency is the key, and it's really important for them to be consistent. Another advantage that I've thought of just going through all my notes is that there's a fair number of nervous Nelly type students that are just kind of freaked out by their instructor sitting next to them. They would leave me alone and just let me try to do this. There's a personality type that is not all that uncommon. And so I think this model would work well for that person. Like, show me how to do it. Don't talk to me about it. So and you touched on that, but I think it's a good alternative in that case.
And just to add to that, I think we, as in-car instructors, we've all had the experience of working with the student, and then getting out of the car and the student goes and drives solo. And afterwards they come back and go, wow, it was so cool for me to learn on my own. It felt a little overwhelming at first, but it was like the light bulb finally went on for me and I got it. So there was that great learning experience from that.
I'll add a nice upside that happens if done right. You end up with a mini group that's kind of supportive of one another. You've got 3 or 4 people that are going through this exciting experience together with a leader. And as a manager of an HPDE organization, I've been able to see light bulbs go on with our instructors, our coaches, that I didn't know they had skills. They're out there kind of doing a group lead and a debrief after their on-track session. And there's some skills there that I didn't know we had. So it's a good opportunity to check out your talent and also stretch the coach's skill set.
Yeah.
And Ross, on the negative side of that, I guess, is this isn't something that every instructor is going to be able to do. You really got to check your ego at the door. Yeah. If you're out there leading a bunch of people around, especially not a bone novice run group, but something that's got a little bit of experience, there's a group of instructors that just can't not drive faster than they really need to be driving for their group, and showing inconsistent lines because they can't restrain themselves, and trying to show off how late they can brake, or maybe go through a corner where they don't brake when they really should have. And that leads the student to try to mimic. You're trying to get the student to mimic absolutely everything you're doing. And what we say typically is try to think of the track as a light covering of snow, and you're following my wheel tracks as close as you can. And if you're drifting around, not drifting, but if you're messing your apexes and not being consistent, and the cars are switching back and forth and all of that, then you're not being effective. So it's sometimes it's not for every instructor.
I'm going to reinforce what Bill said. Almost every group I've ever worked with, there's 2 of the real regular instructors or really fast drivers, and you put a program together, and 2 of them literally can't drive slow enough. They will not. It's not in their DNA. And you can, if they can't figure it out, it's okay. It's just not for them. But it's a surprise. It'll surprise you.
Yeah, I had somebody the other day say, some instructors won't be able to do this, and my response was, there are some instructors that can't do in-car either. So I mean, it's you're right, Bill. It's not for everybody. But I believe everybody who is a good instructor in the car can learn how to do this. Is it something that takes some practice and some training and some development? Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll kind of touch on how that big part of that. But both of you just comment on your experience in terms of, is lead follow for beginners? Is it for intermediate drivers? Is it for advanced drivers? What's your experience?
It's a little easier, I think, starting at the lower experience levels. A lot of times when you're doing right-hand seat work with an advanced student, you're taking the real fine tuning and taking the nuance kind of out of what they're doing incorrectly. You can't really do that in lead follow. You can't take that, you should be a half a car width closer to the apex here, or brake a half a car length later in the brake zone. So to me, it's a little easier to do when you've got first time on the track kind of drivers. But that's where it's really can also be the most frustrating, because it's a whole new environment for them. We've had drivers that use their turn signals going into turn one. So you're driving at 35 miles an hour because it looks like a country road, and that's typically what you drive on a country road. So you really got to lay back and do a little bit of theoretical hand holding on them more than you think. So more beginner student up to an intermediate student, I think, leads itself for this very, very well.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would generally agree with you, Bill. And you all haven't seen and we haven't talked about the structure of how a beginner program with lead and follow would happen, and we'll be talking about that. But I think it's really ideal for that first timer. We could debate all night. In-car is the accepted standard now for sure. But if it's organized well for a beginner group, that would be the best application compared to intermediate or advanced. At intermediate, we do, we'll grab, in our intermediate group, let's say we have 3 or 4 people that show up at an event that have a lot of experience but have never seen the track before. They're new to that track. That's a perfect situation to do a lead and follow format. And it's less structured. They do have a quick stand-up meeting. We'll have one senior driving coach pick up the 3 or 4 cars and just show them, first of all, what's behind that hill over there and those kinds of things. So they know where the pit out is, pit exit, et cetera, or track exit. So at the intermediate level, at least orientation wise, it's good. I think that I've used it at a high level with really quick advanced students, but it's fairly rare, and you got to have the right circumstance. You got to have the right coach, and you got to have the right car. You have to have a fairly good match of vehicles, and then going out at an advanced level and running some silhouette laps. Follow me through 8. This guy just can't figure out 8. Let's get together. Let's do 9/10, and let's go get 8 figured out. That's a whole different kind of thing than what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had that experience and have used that a lot. So let's jump into, I guess, sort of some process of how this whole thing works. I'm sure there's a lot of people on here who have been through this, and they do get it, and they have some experience. But there are some who are just totally new to it, and so let's just kind of talk our way through this whole thing. And we made all these notes here, and I'm going to kind of run down some of these ones reasonably quick as some of them. So. This whole thing of doing lead follow instruction, it starts at the top, meaning your chief instructor, whoever is organizing the event, needs to begin the process. And that, to me, somebody the other day said, you can't just flip a switch and say, here you go, we're doing this now. It takes planning, it takes some training, it takes putting together the process. And, again, I know that Bill and David, you guys are both involved with groups that are implementing this now and putting together procedure manuals, guides, right? And we will share something with you as we go along here. So I think that's really important. The communication from the top is critically important. To just expect that instructors are going to show up on a Saturday morning, you're going to say, hey guys, we're doing lead follow today, let's go. That is a recipe for disaster. Do not do it. In fact, if we could, we would call the police and have you arrested for that. So prepping your instructors who are going to be, lead instructors, leading the groups is important. We believe it actually starts in the classroom. Your classroom instructors need to be on board with it. And the first, we all know that students at HPDE events, their minds they're over full, and they need to be told things with lots of repetition. They need to be told things with lots of repetition, right? We need to repeat things over and over and over again. Okay, sorry. And that needs to start in the classroom. So the classroom instructor needs to give them the overview of how the whole lead follow thing is going to work. then the instructor that's going to do the lead part of the instruction needs to do it in the paddock area. And then as you line up in pit lane again, and then you go and do it. So there's a lot of that communication. But again, it starts with the chief instructor, making sure that the instructors, the lead instructors, are prepared for that. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Throw in, don't give them the whole 9 yards. Give them one bit at a time. This is what we're going to do when we go out on the track this time, because the rules are going to change as the pace picks up and people figure out the track.
Yeah. And again, we believe that from starting with the chief instructor, or however who's in charge of organizing your events, you need to create a document that it can be shared with every single person in your group. The instructors, the registrar, term workers, everybody that's involved with your organization needs to know what's going on. And that document, I know that David's created one. We've created a template, and we will make sure that that's on Motorsport MSF's website tomorrow. You'll be able to download it, and basically it's a Word document that's kind of a template, and it's more like a worksheet for you to go through and go, and some examples of certain things you want in it. But you'll be able to use that as a tool to then be able to create this document that then you can then give to your instructors. So, that's the first part of the process. Like I said, it's introduced in the classroom, it's briefed in the paddock area. One of the key things that needs to be emphasized is, hey, student, if you think that you're going to be able to hang back from me and then get a big run through some section of track, if you try it once, we're stopping. Like, that's a no-no.
I see a question pop in there that classroom instruction might not be possible right now. And the suggestion is get the information out to them in advance, or a Zoom meeting, or we are going to do stand-up meetings with outdoor meetings with social distancing. So, but it's definitely something you got to figure out.
Great point. And yeah, I mean, it could be every student gets a very simple, a slimmed down, very simple version of, half a dozen bullet points, and that gets emailed out to them before they even show up at the event. And then there's a quick outside meeting. So yeah, great point. Thanks for catching that. Let's see. Oh, you cannot over communicate all this stuff to the students. But as David pointed out, you can dump too much on them all at one time. So trickle it out to them. Our experience is the best way to do this is to line your students up in the paddock area. So let's say my two students are Bill and David. I'm going to make arrangements that David, I'm going to drive my car over, and it is a black so-and-so. And it's a black Bentley GT because, anyway, sorry. So I'm going to drive over into the paddock area, and we're going to meet there. And at that point, I'm going to just do a quick briefing on what we're going to do here. We're going to pull out into pit lane, and I'm going to get you spaced out in pit lane about the distance that I want you to follow me when we're on the track. And kind of the general rule or guideline there is about 3 car lengths between cars. So that's a great way. And if you can then take your students out, lead them out into pit lane and line them up with that 3 car length gap, and then say, see what that looks like? And Bill, you were talking about this the other day, how to get that visual picture.
Yeah, one of the things we do at NCM, since the students are all driving the track's Corvettes, is we have the rear Corvette emblem to scale on the sidewall of the classroom. And as you're walking out of the classroom, from the door to the exterior to that wall, car lengths. So we say, hold like you're driving a steering wheel, look at the size of that emblem compared to your thumb or your finger or something, and say that's as big, that's as little as you want it to be. So you can do that in the paddock as well, or on the hot grid as well, as you got them all lined up, and you say, look at my roundel on the back of the license, sorry, on the back of the trunk, or look at the number of my license plate, measure that with something that you'll see and say, that's as little as I want. Even bigger is better. We've been doing this quite a while. I've been doing this quite a while, and I've never had anybody follow me too close. Now, this is a little different situation. We're not using advanced students. We're not even up to, a high-ranking intermediate. But most of the time, you've got to really slow down and wait for those students because they're driving, top speed is 60 miles an hour the first time out on the track.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say that I have had a few students who did follow too close. And the one disadvantage is they get so close that they can't see the track references anymore.
Right.
My car is blocking their view.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've rolled out into pit lane, and I've said, okay, guys, line your cars up behind me. And again, here's the spacing, and I'd like you to keep that. And David?
Before we go too far, I want to throw in a quickie.
Yep.
If you have the time and the resources, plan your groups. And try to make your groups a little bit more homogeneous. Don't just throw everybody, okay, let's take Bob, Sue, and Fred and give them to Ross. Look at their experience, look at the vehicles they're driving. And, to some extent, you can make them similar to one another in terms of anticipated pace. It's worth a look and give an assignment based on a little research there. And then what you've got then is, if you do know you've got 2 or 3 groups that are stacked with championship autocrossers or something, maybe those groups are assigned to go out at the front of the pack to try to balance things out from a pace standpoint.
Great point.
Yep.
Speaking of pace, to me, there are only 3 levels of pace, of speed, that an instructor should ever use doing lead follow: slow, medium, and moderate. To your point of an instructor who gets out there and goes, I only can drive 1 speed, and that's fast. Guess what? This isn't for you. So, thinking about lead follow, it's a tool to demonstrate. And, Bill, something you touched on earlier, and I just want to, reinforce right now, is when you're out there, your job is to demonstrate the line. So you got to drive on the line, but you're also demonstrating what a driver should be doing with the controls. So if you're driving around at 40% of your normal speed, you may come to a corner and go, I don't even need to brake. Yes, you do. Your brake lights need to come on and be on at the exact same time, and they need to go off at the exact same time that they would if you were driving at 9/10 or 10/10. So your job is to make your brake lights work exactly as they would when you want the student driving faster. So you got to mimic that part of it too, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, these are laps that are probably going to be done a little slower than you're used to driving, or even demonstrating. Even on a demo lap, you think, hey, hop in my car. Usually in the old days when we could do in-car, every now and then you might go, hey, hop in my car. I wanted to give you a demo and show you what to do. I doubt you will ever be doing lead follow at that pace even. Everything's going to be done a little slower than that.
It's more of a spirited touring lap.
Yeah. Because again, what you're doing is trying to demonstrate the techniques and the line and what somebody should be doing with the brakes, the steering wheel, and the gas pedal. So, let's talk.
Ross, just to be clear, this is helmets on. This isn't the first touring lap kind of a thing that a lot of organizations do first thing in the morning. This is real deal. Helmets on. Windows down. Everything's normal.
Yeah. And I guess we should add that they've obviously had all the safety orientation, the flag orientation before this.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about one of the most important things is the communication that you can provide to your students while you're driving. And again, some organizations might be looking at using radios. Some have looked at, can we use our cell phones and everything? Let's assume that we don't have that. And in this case, we're going to be doing it with hand signals. So what we're doing here is I think we've decided we've gone beyond proposing the new standard for hand signals for lead follow. This is it. Stamped, boom, this is it. Okay, everybody? I know somebody's going to argue, but these work, and these are hand signals that have been used. Where if you're driving down the track and you want the student to follow you, like you're trying to remind them to follow, hand goes out the window, tap on the roof. That's follow me. If the student is kind of falling back and you need to remind them, it's tap, tap, tap on the roof. And you might need to do it just enough times that you can be sure that they've seen you. But if they're kind of starting to weave around or not following you, falling back and everything, hand goes on the roof. And again, you've described this to your students beforehand. If I'm tapping the roof of the car, that's a signal. Get behind me. And David, as you pointed out, I want you to line up with my rear view mirror at all times, right?
Yeah, and I will use that also in a third situation after we've been doing a few laps and somebody's doing something wrong every time. I'll use that to pull them in and be sure they follow me through the thing they're doing wrong. Like catch them right before the entry of 8 and come on, let's do 8 correctly. Get up there and watch me.
Yeah, good point. If a student is falling back, or sorry, they've gotten too close and you actually want them to back off a little bit, you can kind of just put your hand up as an open hand, and that's the signal of just back off a little bit, just like that. When you get to that point, and again, beforehand, you have described this to your students. You've said, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to do 2 laps. And on the second lap, when we come to this part of the track, typically the longest straightaway or the front straightaway, we're going to do a rotation. And what we want you to do is the second car in line, we want you to move over and let the next car come up, and then you tuck in behind or at the back of the third car. And the signal, you can tell a student on the second lap, do this, but some students are not going to remember that. So the signal for that is hand out the window, and I'm trying to make sure that my hand is in the camera view here, but the signal is a circle, a rotation. This is rotation, and you can put it straight out the side and do a big rotation like that. And that means it's time to rotate. So you just give your students a signal to do that. Again, the procedure then is that student kind of moves out of the way, the other 1 or 2 car moves up, and that one pulls in behind. You go and do 2 laps, same thing. And having to kind of think a little bit more, okay, where was I supposed to be? So they're thinking and learning on their own as well. And then they come back up and again in line behind again. So you keep rotating them through like that, and it works well. David, you touched on this one, or you brought this one up, and it's a really good one. If you have a student that's just kind of, they're always half a car's width off of the apex, it's perfectly fine to put your arm out the window and like point down at the apex or the track out point and just like emphasize that. And again, you have discussed this with your students beforehand. If I'm pointing at the ground, I'm pointing at a reference point that I want you to make the car go by and clip right by there.
Could be a track out point too.
Yep. If the typical thing is if you're pitting, arm out the window, fist. Most groups use that. Some it doesn't know anything. But if you tell everybody that when your hand goes out and there's a fist, that means we're pitting this lap. And you use that all the way into the pit lane. So those are the hand signals. We're going to put that out there as part of this template. And we're going to ask all of you to start to standardize this. The worst thing that can happen is if you have a student go and work with a group and they use these signals, and then they go to another one and they use those signals, and then they go to a third group or session and they're using some completely different thing. You're just confused. You're making it worse. You may think that you have a better one, and maybe you do, but consistency is more important than your better option. So let's just all go with that. And you could say we're making this up as we go along. Actually, again, these are hand signals that we've used through many years of experience, but also we're now going to standardize them as well. Anything to add there, guys?
No, I think that got it. It looks like some people are having a little bit of trouble on some connections, and a bunch might have lost that last command. So when you're asking for when you're reminding them of the rotation for passing, it's basically the helicopter. You can do it straight up like that, or with your arm straight out, similar to a passing signal. But rotate the finger means, you're spinning it. I'm doing it too fast. You're spinning it to show the rotation.
Yeah. Anybody? Yeah. Somebody said that if they had a problem, you can just hit that little red reconnect button and it reconnects. So on the webinar, if that glitches out. I don't know how many people have been on about 1,000 Zoom calls and Skype calls and WebEx calls in the past few weeks, to the point where your internet is about to explode and everybody and all your neighbors are going, why can't I get, anyways. So,
hey, Ross, the question, are you going to put those hand signals in your template?
Yes.
They're okay.
Yes. Yep. They're going to be listed, and they're just going to be listed as a description of each one. Handled the window, I'm making a circular motion, indicates the following student to move to one side of the track straight away and allow the next car to take his place. The student originally behind the lead car should move in behind the fastest. This is the initiate rotation signal. So that'll be all in this document that goes out.
So I'm going to throw in a little comment about teaching the rotation, and people will laugh, but there will be 10% of the people didn't get it when you explained it at the meeting. They're like, what do I do now? And but they said no passing, and the guy's telling me to pass or whatever. We actually will have the 3 students line up and do it standing up in the parking lot before they get in the car.
That is brilliant.
It takes about 60 seconds for them to visualize what we're actually going to do, because they're all nervous and they're going 80 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, whatever. Just handy to make it flow, and nobody's hesitant.
So you actually had them physically walk like
they
you want
walk
the rotation to work.
Yeah. I mean, we can have, we chuckle while we're doing it. You're like, this is not rocket science, guys, but we want to be sure you know how to do it.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. That kind of stuff, it works. So just going to touch on a couple of things. As an instructor in that lead car, you've got to keep an eye on the mirrors. If you have been taught the proper way to adjust your side mirrors, which is tilting them out a little further than the average driver on the street, in this case, you may end up having to tilt your mirrors in a little bit, because you're going to be using your side mirrors a little bit more to keep track of the cars behind you. If you already have your side mirrors tilted in so you can see the side of your own car, not good for traffic, but in this case, it might work as an instructor doing this. You have to drive the line while keeping an eye on the rear view mirror and the side mirrors and kind of tracking where your students are. For an instructor who's experienced at a track, this won't be that difficult to do. Where it gets really difficult is you're an instructor and you've been asked to work an event and you're at a track that maybe you've driven once before and you're just not super experienced with it. And you're now trying to drive that, and you're going, well, I'm having to use 90% of my brain just to get around the track. Again, if you need to, slow down. Drive at a pace that you can do your job as well, because the students, they'll be fine with it.
Well, actually, you know what? Even if it's their favorite track that they hold a track record on, the hardest thing will be to slow down.
Yeah. So flip the other way. It's hard. Yeah, you're right. If you have a student who continually falls back from you, they're either struggling to keep up, or they're one of the drivers that, I'm going to hang back and then try to get a run through this corner. So if they start hanging back, the very first thing you do is you slow down to them. If they then hang back further, you slow down again. If you've done that twice and they're still falling back there, you may end up having to pit and have a conversation around, I need you to drive closer to me. So you may need to do that. And again, if you have a student who is deliberately hanging back to try to get a run to drive faster, you just need to have the conversation that, again, it's around the whole thing that we've always had lots of conversation with certain students who why are we here? We're here to learn. We got to stay within the spirit of the event, and the spirit of the event is driving safely and having fun. So no hanging back and doing that.
And Ross, just to reiterate that a little bit, you can also use the other students in your group to reinforce better behavior. If you're having to pull in because of one of the students, ask the other two students, you notice you're losing track time here. You notice we're doing this because of your fellow students. Could you help me keep him, a little more in check here? So you're not just always the heavy. You can spread that load a little bit.
Good one.
Ross, I'll throw in also that there will be a lot of different circumstances. You might have 4 groups of 3. You might have 6 groups of 3. You might end up having a fairly crowded track or maybe a fairly empty track. So the circumstances are all going to be different. Generally, we're going to just say the very first time out, there's nothing. There's lead and follow. There are no passes. And if a faster group catches up, slow down. And everybody gets through the first session with no drama, no complicated stuff, and comes in, and then we debrief, and then we go, if at all possible, we try to go to that rotation exercise the second time out.
And I'm just going to reinforce this because it's so important, is, again, your brake lights need to match the way you want your student to drive. If you're driving around slow and thinking, I don't need to use the brakes, yes, you do. You just, even if I have at times been driving so slow on a lead follow that I didn't need to brake, but I would actually just put my left foot on the brakes to put on the lights, even while I'm on the gas, just to kind of light up the brake lights so the student knows, oh, that's where I brake all the time. So you're trying to build that habit into their driving. And then release the brake at the right place. So your brake lights need to mimic what you want the student to do when they're driving.
And you need to share that with the students. Tell them you're braking where they need to be braking, and have them look at either the brake markers that are at the end of that straightaway or a fence post, corner worker station. Start to get their eyes wider on the track and not just staring at the front or at the back of your car. So they can start, broadening that visual screen.
Right. So I know we've kind of run through a lot of stuff fairly quickly here, but, to steal your line, David, this isn't rocket science. People have been doing this for decades. As we've proven, it can be done, and it can be done safely, and it can be done as well and be as effective as in-car instruction. And again, I think the most important thing I'd like to just stress is I think this is another tool that you need to start to think about. How is this going to incorporate in our training going forward, even when we're allowed to get back in the cars? Is this another tool that we can start to weave into what we do here? So guys, any other comments, anything? I'm sure we've missed some things, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions here.
Well, from an organizer standpoint, you got to really consider you're putting a whole lot more cars on the track now. If you've got your normal run group of novices and you're putting a car on the track for every 2 cars that you've got or every 3 cars that you've got, you've got a crowded track. So you got to think about, okay, if I'm going to do this, maybe I don't have 25 novice students. Maybe I only have 18. It makes the finances tough, but driving around nose to tail all the way around all the time, is not a good thing either.
True that.
And one of the other things I think related to that is, if your sessions were, let's say they were 25-minute sessions, you may want to look at making your sessions 20 minutes or even 15 minutes, because there is going to take a little bit more time to brief, get everybody together and go, and then a little bit more time when you come back in again. So, a lot of times instructors are in this situation where, I get at the end of the session, I've got like 3 minutes to debrief with my student before my session or the next session. You may need to build in a little bit more time for that. And, so, and there's a whole other part of, what do you do when you come in off the track? I think, asking questions is the key thing. I was talking with Eric Meyer earlier today, and he was just in reminding me just how important it is. I think he said, 80% of what happens should be the student talking. 20% should be you talking. And, that's just you asking, how was that? How did that feel? What did you learn? What did you notice? And you getting them talking and giving you the feedback. Really, really important thing there.
Yeah, I think from an organizer standpoint, you really got to, I agree with what you guys are saying. That debrief in a lead and follow is a huge thing, and it's got to have time on the schedule. We're all about classroom time, and whether COVID or not, we've got all these great presentations. We're going to go ahead and do some of the PowerPoint stuff ahead of time on a Zoom presentation to our A folks to kind of de-content what we have to feed them, and on a lead and follow, really give them some time. It's a time to celebrate. Wow, hey, did you guys have fun out there? Was that a good time? My God, this is a great track, isn't it? What's the and have a good 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm just guessing there, and that may or may not be practical, but that's a fun part of the day for folks, and it's a fun part of the day for the coach too.
And just remind me, what does HPDE stand for? What does the E part stand for?
Education.
Education. Oh, it's not some way of saying drive as fast as you possibly can and be an idiot. Sorry. So yeah, I mean, it's all about learning. So I don't know. How are the questions coming in? Have you guys been watching them?
I've been trying. They've really been typing fast.
Yeah,
a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. I think there's a whole nother content about communication, use of video, and all of that. So, I mean, there's a whole several layers more. We're talking about the basics here to a group that may not have ever done it before. I just wrote down some notes. It will work if it is organized and the organization is communicated clearly to everyone. And I saw somebody say, and I totally agree with them, if you send them an email, they don't read S before an event. They don't read their attachments and stuff. So you gotta, like Russ said, you gotta tell them in the meeting, you gotta have the coach tell them, everybody's gotta know on track. And then you do have to enforce. If there's a bad actor, or even a coach, I mean, there's some leaders in the group and managers on this call. If someone's trying to do their own thing, it's got to be stopped right away, because then it can go from a safe, effective process to a confusing, unsafe process really quickly. So, organize, communicate, enforce.
So a couple of, one is MSF, we're going to host another session sometime in the next few weeks, depending on schedules and stuff like that. And I'm going to have a couple of 2 or 3 other experienced lead follow instructors on, and we're going to kind of do a Q&A session, and we'll be able to really dig in and just start to answer all your questions. So all of you that have been on this will be notified when that happens. A couple of things that I just saw pop up here. One of them was, what about group passing? And David, this is something you've recently been working on in terms of, if you've got, probably in the first session, there is no group passing. Second session, probably no group passing. Third session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so our suggestion is, first of all, to be sure everybody knows this can happen and this is how it's going to happen, and that is its use of flashers. When a lead driver sees a group attacking the back of your group and there's a mismatch and it's time to let them by, you hit the flashers, you see that the other 2 cars behind you have the flashers. When the flashers go on, we move over, we will take offline. This is not how we normally do our passing protocols, but when group passing groups is a different thing. We want the group out of the way, the group to go by. That back car is going to be okay to do point bys, but really that's not required. Flashers, when the cars move over, mean the next group can move on past. So that's our technique, and then immediately the leader's got to remember to turn the flashers off. Yeah.
Okay, good procedure there. There was a question
you've al-
about, well, how do do we teach heel and toe? Do we teach, a bunch of those things? I mean, obviously we can't work on the details of the controls in the car at that point in time. Again, you will find that with experience, you'll get really good at noticing what some students are doing. And you may, during the debrief, you may have a student that says, well, my foot keeps slipping off the pedal when I heel and toe, or when I left foot brake, and you're like, oh, well, let's sit down and let's take a look at that. Keeping 6 feet away. You may be able to just say, sit in your car and show me what's happening. And you go through some of that while you're in the paddock area.
Also would encourage most folks, especially in the first couple of sessions, depending on how many hills and the nature of your tracks, don't shift a lot. Go to third gear and leave it alone if you can. Let's find out the line and find the braking zones, find the apexes.
Yeah.
The other thing, Ross, going back to the group passing thing, there's always pit lane. You can, if the track doesn't really facilitate a group pass like that very easily, you can always pull them down pit lane and do it that way. We're lucky at NCM that we've got a couple chicanes and a couple crossover areas where different configurations are. We can actually pull the group into that, have them slow just barely enough that the group then gets around them and through the chicane and goes on.
You spurred a thought using the pit lane, and that is one of the rules we will announce. That's a universal rule. If your group gets broken up, we'll meet in the pit lane. Something could happen. I've got a mechanical problem, or somebody passed me that shouldn't have, and I got out of line. Finish the lap safely without passing people and get into the pit lane.
So I just noticed, Natalie asked the question, can lead follow be done with one student on track if no other lead follow is going on? I'm assuming the question is, let's say you've got a group that's a group of solo drivers, but you want to go and do lead follow with one student. Your guys' experience?
We do that. We actually have kind of a combined A solo with an A novice group, so that in this scenario that will be happening. So we've got to tell the flaggers what to look for sure, and obviously all the solo guys need to understand the deal, and the lead cars have to be on the spot to double up on the point buys. But that can happen. Yeah.
I think Larry had asked a question about the progression from lead follow to solo. And this is where it's perhaps a little bit more challenging to make that decision of, we can see a driver on the track driving the right line, consistently on the right line, doing the right things, all that stuff, the speed, everything seems under control. They could have a really bad habit within the car. In the ideal world, you'd go, hey, do you have a GoPro that you could mount inside the car, and I could see your hands and your feet a little bit? If you don't have that, it does get more difficult, and at some point you kind of just have to make that gut decision that the driver is consistently driving a good line, good pace. They're not doing anything crazy. They seem to be aware of what's going on around them. They may be ready to solo. I think, if you've got drivers who are getting into lead follow now in the next month or two, hopefully by the time they're ready to solo, we've got a point. We're at that point with the whole COVID situation where we could do an in-car check ride, hopefully.
You could also have a session, if you're able to do a check ride, have the instructor follow the car that's wanting to get checked out. That way you can see where his vision is. Has he been just, dogtailing you all the way around, or does he actually know where the track's going? You can pick up maybe a few more minor mistakes in braking application and some of that by following him around.
Mark and Jacob just echoed what you said. And Brian's asking, what if your student goes off? Do you just hope they can rejoin the track and make their way back to the pits by themselves? Again, this is part of that clear communication beforehand. You have discussed that with your student beforehand. If you should go off the track, this is the procedure. And it seems like every organization and track has a different guidelines around how you deal with that. If you drop one wheel, you got to come into the pits. If you go off the track, you have to come in. If you spin, so that needs to be factored into that. And I don't think we can say this is exactly what it is. My recommendation would be if a student goes off the track, they should be told that if they go off the track and they're able to safely re-enter the track, come back around and enter the pit lane, always come back into the pit lane. And then you, as the lead car instructor, you will notice that car is gone. So you're going to come into the pits.
Oh, hopefully.
Hopefully. And if not, then you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. David?
I've got one. It can be very valuable after the second or third session to have a lead driver group meeting and talk about how everybody's doing. And we do this, and it's frequent that we end up swapping 2 or 3 drivers. I've got one real slow person and 2 fast people. The other I've got 2 fast persons and 1 slow person. And there is some switching around to have a more homogeneous group as the pace has picked up a little bit. And you've got one, so in other words, you create a slow group and a fast group, and that's okay. And let the fast group line up first.
Stephen Pietieri asked, it seems like instructor will take a backseat to barely communicating with the student. I get what you're saying there, but I'm not sure I don't totally agree with you. I think it's just a different way of looking at instructing. I will tell you that, a lot of the coaches that I work with and around, in my day-to-day job is, we started out working with a lot of drivers driving open wheel cars that you could never get into. So we learned how to instruct drivers never being in a car. And you learn very quickly that you can be just as effective, and again, sometimes even more so, you can be just as effective not being in the car. It's just, if that's the only way that you've instructed in the past, this is going to be it's a different mindset, and it's going to take a little while for you to get used to it. But you will find over time that you can be just as effective. It's just you have to do your communication more heavily up front and at the end, and be okay letting the student learn from your example and from them learning on their own as well. And just remember that if you learn something on your own, it tends to stick with you longer. So there is some benefits there. So,
Ross, there's a comment there about using cell phones, using radios, all of that, but still needing to have the hand signals very, very clear and defined, because radio signals get dropped, cell phones run out of battery. You're out on the track halfway through the session, and your phone dies or falls out the window or whatever. You still got to know what that means when the guy's doing that. You're in a loud, prepared car and you can't hear your phone, whatever it is. So you've always got to go back to the basic, back to how do you communicate without anything electronic?
Yeah, there are pros and cons to that, and I guess if you had a totally 100% reliable solution, great. But again, it can be done without it. So, where was that? Matt had asked talk about liability and cost. I mean, liability, I'm not seeing any additional liability. And again, I'll tell you that schools like Skip Barber and Bondurant and everybody else that's been around for decades, they wouldn't still be in business, I think, if the liability thing was an issue. And I just saw somebody else bring up the whole liability thing. So just I don't see where it's I don't believe it's an issue. So anyway.
Yeah, and I would say check with your sanctioning organization if you have questions about that.
Yeah. Okay. Arnie asked, how do you recommend students communicate to the leader? Good question. One of the things in your procedures document that will be part of the template, one of the things you would suggest in there is that every instructor tells a student, if the student, if you have any problem whatsoever, flash your lights at me. And it may be just as simple as that. Somebody's going to bring up, well, what if a student doesn't have headlights in their car to flash it? Okay, we're going to have to work around that. But that's such a rare thing that these days, the student's got a problem and just, I can't keep up. I'm overloaded. I'm going to be sick to my stomach. Flash your lights. We'll pull into the pits. Okay. Lead follow allows you to show a student what to do rather than telling them what to do. Don't say don't want. Yeah, great point there. Sorry, just jumped off before I even got a chance to see who that was. Scott, good to see you. Talked about how the Porsche driving experience uses also a tail car, a follow car, which is, again, something, Bill, you brought up, is there comes a point in there as part of perhaps the getting closer to the solo is maybe now it's no longer solo, but I'm now going to follow you. And you need to demonstrate consistent, online, all that stuff. So, and Mitch jumps in and says it's stated by learn from doing. And sorry, Mitch, your thing jumped off before I got a chance to finish it. But what Mitch says, listen to him. Okay, so, great point. Somebody said, can I download a video of this session? Yes. Assuming we don't have any major technical glitches when the recording gets put together. Tomorrow on the Motorsport-Safety Foundation website, this video, the recording of this will be uploaded to that, along with this template of the document that then you can use kind of as a worksheet to build it. And that should be up there. I encourage you all to share it. Like, this is, we're in, how many times have you heard this in the past couple of months? We're all in this together. Yeah, we're all in this together, especially our community. So share this information with everybody, every other instructor. If an instructor that you know was not able to be on this tonight, share this with them and tell them to go there and watch it. And I know for sure as a fact that if you're a chief instructor, you need to be telling your instructors, every single one of you needs to at least watch this and then sign up for the next Q&A session that we do on this topic as well, and keep sharing this information. We all learn from each other. I know there were some other questions in there, and I know there were some other comments earlier on. I saw a couple of them flash up about, about the use of, if a student does have an in-car camera, a GoPro or something like that, can we use it afterwards? Absolutely. It's just another tool. In fact, it's a great way of checking in on their use of their controls. Can a student intergroup communication during standard point by? Yes, on that. And again, it's tied into that document with the standard hand signals. David, you had something?
Well, this might be controversial, but just a gut feeling that's coming from the conversation and the issue of communication systems. I am definitely old school. We did a lot of this in a lot of situations with no comm systems. I would love to see at least the first session, just don't play with any toys, just drive. Let's just concentrate on staying at my pace, at my gap, and looking ahead and figuring out where the racetrack goes. There shouldn't be a lot of need for comm in the first couple of sessions. That's just one guy's opinion. Clearly down the road, there's beautiful ways to use it as folks move up the ladder.
Well, somebody asked me the other day, what are some of the common mistakes that I see HPDE instructors make? And the first thing that popped into my mind was they want to talk too much. They want to just and pound it into the student. And I think we can very easily, and one of the advantages of this is we can't do that. So really, really great stuff. Man, I'm trying to keep up all this stuff. Any more stuff you guys want to toss in here? We're coming up on, we're over an hour. We promised we'd be an hour. Hey, again, we will put out a link to the recording disc. We'll try to get it out onto as many of the Facebook HPDE pages. And again, if you see a link to it, please share it with every instructor that you know, because again, we've got to change this thing. David?
I saw a good comment pop through, and that is on your Q&A session, maybe offer for folks to submit questions in advance and you could kind of vet them.
Yes, we'll do that. And I'll also have a moderator to help manage the questions. When they're coming in this fast, it gets...
No kidding. Like, what?
Yeah. Hey, so
Lot of
everybody,
energy.
thank you so much for being here. To me, the response to this, the number of people we've had on there, it says a lot about our community, about our industry, about the instructors. Like, what an amazing group of people all of you are to take time to be on this, to be a better instructor, to be an even better instructor, and help our students, because that's why we're here, right? To help our students. And the fact that you're here learning to be better at this and do this new approach is just going to help our students. So thanks everybody for being on here. Bill, David, thank
Ross,
you.
appreciate the opportunity. Everybody, please go there and find the recording of this and and the template that we've drafted up.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. No,
Okay, everybody.
great to be part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Bill. And thanks for everybody for being on here. This has been fun.